So my background is, I have a background in journalism. I tried to be a journalist in Latin America for a while. In Central America, which is, my big joke on that is that's not Oklahoma. Some people are. Guatemala, Nicaragua, several places like that. And came back, hammered on the doors of the BBC and persuaded them to give me a job a long time ago now. And I did some work as a journalist also, and for radio. Became a programme maker, did a bit of presenting. I ended up here in Bristol as a senior producer for features and documentaries. Then quit in order to run my own business, and so I technically am a programme maker. But as a freelancer, of course, you become a jack of all trades, as some of you may know, and you tend not to say no to anything. And one of the strange things that happened, apart from a bit of teaching, which I still do, and I taught at Birkbeck for quite a long time, and now at Ewing. I was programme making, but also people were asking me if I would help them be interviewed. I've got to be interviewed on television or radio, if you've got any tips. And eventually I began to run a business. I should say the BBC trained me to be a trainer, so that was dead useful. They're a very good training organisation. And I kept that with me and sort of went out into the world with this sort of developing this training arm also. And now it sort of dominates my life. I do more teaching people to be on radio and television and how to speak in public, and all sorts of varieties and permutations of that. So that's what I do. And what I'm going to talk to you about for a few minutes now, and then we'll have hopefully plenty of time for questions, is my sort of cunning plan, really, for how to prepare for interviews. So apologies, you will have seen some of this before, Emma. By the way, here's a trick. Some of you may know this, but Lizzie expressed amazement, so I'll tell you what it is. If you put your if you have PowerPoint in slideshow mode and you press the W key, did you know the screen goes white? Which is quite useful because you don't have to have stuff on the screen if you're not talking about it. And if you press the B key, it goes blank or black like that. And this is true. You can do this anywhere in the world except in France. And there it's N for noir and B for blanc, for white, of course. And the other little thing that you can do is if you want to go to, say, I want to go to slide number 5, you press 5 and return key. Oh, there we go. 5 and return. Oh, it won't do it for me. How annoying. Oh, I know why. That's because it's the same slide. There we go.
So it was doing it.
Yeah, it was doing it. I've just repeated the slide and it'll jump straight to it. So there you go. And so I've called this Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway because my briefing is to, I've just realised I'm going to need to stand relatively still, aren't I, Lizzie, because you're filming. So. My briefing is to help encourage you, really, with what you can do ahead of meeting the media. I want to encourage you to meet the media anyway. So I borrowed this from Susan Jeffers' book, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. It's well-known self-help text. And I hope you like my terrified interviewee there, just to encourage you. Because I guess it's so scary, partly because, well, it's unfamiliar. And the media is kind of fast-moving and rather sort of brutal environment. It feels, anyway, to us. And then there are these characters, like Emily Maitlis, there's the famous Paxman who's going off of Newsnight quite soon. John Humphreys, you get in the mornings on Radio 4, who just generally beat up politicians for a living. And so we form the habit that that kind of aggressive macho interviewing, is this me? It might be. This aggressive macho interviewing is what the media is all about. Although it should be said that although these people are paid to try and get the truth, as it were, or get to the bottom of things. It's not a typical form of interviewing. I'm sorry, is that, I don't know why that's making that noise. I don't think there's much I can do about it. Is it common? No, it's not common. Okay. Tell me if it bothers you. So I want to encourage you to feel the fear, but do it anyway, because if you just take radio, for example, 90% of the population reckons it listens to the radio at least once a day. Just looking at some statistics here on Radio 4, it's 10.9 million people claim to listen to Radio 4 at some point in the week. So that's what their reach is. That's a lot, isn't it? 10.9 million people. That's quite a bit. Radio 2, I hope you like my joke about the Rolling Stones. That's because the average age of listeners is 32. I thought they're kind of getting on for 3 times that. Maybe a bit less. 10.9 million listeners to listen to Radio 2. If you take a specific programme like Chris Evans, their flagship breakfast show in the morning, here at 8:30 in the morning, 9.4 million people are listening. And Chris Evans does little interviews and we'll pick people up, especially if it's a kind of a quirky sort of thing, and we'll just chat to people in his show, and you might get a couple of minutes of conversation with him. 9.4 million people, that's incredible. When did you last speak to 9.4 million people? Some of you may have done recently, but it's an unusual experience for most of us. Today programme at its peak at 8:30 again in the morning, 8 million people are listening. Let's take some little thing. BCfm in Bristol, which is, I have a radio show on BCfm on Mondays about science, and there's 100,000 listeners to that. That's amazing. I mean, that is truly amazing. 100,000 people listening to that station. So it's worth doing, that's my point. It's worth doing. Here are just some quick figures about, I don't know whether the daybreak has changed since Susanna Reid has gone over to the new equivalent of that, but it's still the poor cousin of BBC. But look, the figures are a lot lower than you might think for morning television. Okay, there are so many ways in which you can be interviewed. It could be live, it could be recorded, it could be in a remote studio somewhere. Someone could turn up to your office with a recording machine. Someone could come and shove a camera in your face at your laboratory or your research station, whatever. You could be on ethnic, some sort of ethnic radio or TV station, or in a newspaper, or some specialist, say, science station. It could, or a program. It could be that you're on a relaxed breakfast news show, or it could be sort of like a hard-hitting Newsnight type program, and the list goes on and on and on. Represented here, just a handful of people from newspapers, radio, and television. The good news is that you could be, whatever it is you're doing that's local or national or whatever, that you will find that there's a basic way of preparing for any kind of an interview. I'm going to very quickly run through some top tips about being interviewed, and then give you my cunning plan for preparing for an interview. So here goes. Just as a quick bit of background, believe it or not, despite bias and everything, interviewers are supposed to be getting the facts straight. And I've never yet met a journalist who wasn't interested in doing that. A newspaper or whatever might put a spin on something, emphasise some things and de-emphasise others, but if you're consistently putting out stuff that isn't true, people don't buy you anymore or listen to you anymore. Their job is to challenge any contradictions and or vaguenesses that arise, and that's usually because we say too much too soon, try and cram too much in a short space of time, or we don't say enough and we don't set things in context. The other thing is that people in the media, journalists are supposed to be putting alternative points of view. So if there is an alternative opinion or approach to what you're saying, you'd be a little crazy not to take it seriously. And then there's the thing that we don't tell people that we're doing, and it's the concern of people like this, and like this, particularly at the moment, is that in the media, just like these guys, we worry a great deal about whether people are going to carry on listening or watching or reading. In the case of Simon Cowell, you have to sort of get a new girlfriend and have a new baby or something like that, just to keep it, or insult somebody, or have a row, or whatever. In our case, we just work really hard at trying to encourage the audience. And I want to tell you something really. I think this is absolutely fundamental about dealing with the media. Most people who don't work with the media, they're not used to being interviewed, they think they might, but they're not. Their anxieties stem from the fact that they think that the media is going to dumb them down, it's out to get them, it's always trying to twist their words, it doesn't really care about detail and so on. Actually, that's not the case. The media is not against you. Honestly, it isn't. It's just that they're doing something completely and utterly different from what you're doing. And the best way I can do this is to give you an analogy. I used to say to people, what the media is doing, they're like people out fishing, like fishermen. You put the fish on the bait on the end of a hook, the hook goes into the water, you wait for a fish to bite, and you reel it in. The only problem with that is that in theory the fish isn't supposed to be able to get off the hook, whereas the audience can. So here's a weird analogy, but I think it's perfect. Okay, you know people who like cats, and they try and lure cats. So a cat will come walking along, and somebody will go like that, make noises at it, and the cat will just look incredibly shocked, like it's the most shocking thing it's ever seen. And then it will relax and it will probably come over and you can kind of talk to it. If it talks back, you've got a fortune there waiting to be exploited. That was a joke. You can stroke the cat, and then the cat will probably just wander off, being a cat. And that's what the media is doing. It's busy luring cats. I know that sounds crazy and weird, but that's it. It's trying to lure the audience over for a while so that it'll spend a little bit of time with it. And then they know the audience will, especially today, will just flit off somewhere else. And they're always just trying to lure people to come and stay. That's what the media is doing. And if you get that about the media, you get everything that's important about working with the media. They're not out to get you. They're not out to do you down. They're not out to do you wrong. They just are trying to lure a load of cats. And if you can help them do that, they'll love you for it. So let's just take this on a little bit further. They need, even the news, right, needs to be interesting and engaging. That's a strange concept, but it's true. There's that cat. Here's some very quick tips. If you are attracting media attention, then as a group who is attracting a media attention, do take time out to talk about what your message should be. We'll come to a message in just a moment. Don't just be haphazard or unplanned about it. Don't be taken by surprise. Decide as a group what you want to say. Know what your critics might say about you. These are very bad critics from the Lord of the Rings. Prepare with real people in mind. For many of us, we think about the audience as some amorphous audience out there, and so we try and talk to these great masses that live in sort of a mysterious place as the audience of our radio or our TV show or even our newspaper article. But actually, a really good discipline is to think about people that you know and like who represent the kinds of people you want to reach. So, you know, is it your mum? Is it, you know, is it a relative? Is it a friend? Is it the guy who runs a corner shop? Who is it? And how would you explain your research or the points that you want to get across about your work to to that audience? What would you say? If I was talking to my mum, who has no scientific background at all and no real scientific facility or anything, if I was to talk to her about what was happening at the Large Hadron Collider in CERN, I would use very different vocabulary and very different words, and I would try and say a different set of things than I would if I was talking to my students at UWE. And what makes that adjustment is the fact that I'm talking to a real person. So I will use appropriate language to speak with them. The best way to get better at it is to practice being interviewed. You don't need a professional to do it. You know, somebody who is able to ask you questions you can't predict in an order you can't predict from an angle you can't predict will do just fine. It's a really good way of sharpening up. The media does not do abstract very well. That's a big problem for us, isn't it? I'm hopping over the fence now, joining you. If you want to talk about concepts, that's really, really tricky. So the media does do it, but it does it in a very specific way. It does it by being concrete. It does it by examples. It does it by painting pictures or using actual images. It does it in concrete ways because it doesn't do abstraction very well. You can do very little by way of communicating ideas. It's just a limitation of the medium. You do a little bit more abstraction on the radio than you can on television, and a bit more in newspapers than you can, and articles and magazines than you can on radio or television. But nevertheless, media is best suited to images of some sort, word pictures, pictures in the mind that you can create in some fashion, and being concrete, giving examples. In other words, talking about the politics of poverty is boring and doesn't ground. Talking about the experience of a person who is poor, that hits home and makes sense. So, can't say much about encountering the media without coming across someone like David Attenborough, who's just a perfect example of somebody who is simple in the way he speaks. You can understand everything he says. You can join his programs halfway through and you get it. And it's usually talking about concrete examples, real animals doing real things and what that means. But he never talks down to his audience. He's never patronising. And I'll come to this in just a moment. Okay. Oh, by the way, beware of notes. You don't have a cat's chance in hell of finding your place in notes during an interview. Maybe in a newspaper interview, but not anything that's conversational. So I have a sheet of A4 paper. I write names and numbers on it, things I think I might forget under pressure, in big felt tip pen, big black felt tip pen, so I can't write much. I put it out of sight and I plan never to use it. But I know it's there as a safety net. Your notes will not serve you well in an interview. I know that's horrifying, but it's true. You need to aim at being conversational. Okay. And maybe, and this is a subliminal message I'll leave up for a while, if you ever need a genius and a sage in the middle of the night, you sort of think to yourself, do I know? In about 5 years' time, this email address will come to you out of nowhere. You're a psychologist, you know this. No, seriously, a fact sheet can be very useful for an interview. This is not a press release, but where you write down, get the name of your institution right and your department right, and the people working in your group correct, and your name spelled properly, and whatever it is that you're working on. Very simple description, and give it to the people who are making the piece about you. And just say, if you find this useful, please, it might help. There's a much better chance they'll spell your name right, when it comes up, or get the facts basically right. And finally, on television, look the way you mean. There's a lot about cats in this, isn't there? Look the way you mean to look. That is to say, it's not my business to tell you how you should look. Having decided how you want to look on television, don't do it by accident. You know, loads of people turn up at a television studio, and the image that is projected of them is not what they wanted. And it's very easy to check that the way you're looking is the way you intend to look. That's all I mean by that. Not that there's a particular way to do it. Okay, here's my quick 4-stage process, and I'll be quick, but I think this is really powerful. And at this time of year, I'm interviewed a great deal myself because of something I'm involved with internationally, and it works for me. I do this myself. The principle is go into an interview with something to say, all right? Don't treat an interview, and this is really, really important, as that it's a situation in which I just hope that I can come up with some answers. Don't treat it like that. Go into an interview with something to say. I take it as read that you'll know your stuff as best you can, but you can still be asked questions that you can't predict in an order that you can't predict from an angle that you can't predict. Okay? So my advice is, when someone says to you, would you do an interview? The answer, I reckon, unless under exceptional circumstances, should be yes. What's it about? Good, I can talk on that. And given that, you think to yourself, so how do I want to use this? I might go onto a little local radio show and be able to influence 100,000 people. Or they might get me on the Today programme and I can reach 8 to 9 million people. Wow! You know. So what do I want to take that opportunity for? Okay. First thing I suggest you do, because it is easier to expand than it is to compress your ideas in under pressure. For that very reason, go to the heart of your message, your messages, and see if you can say what the essence is. If you're not sure what I'm talking about, let's imagine you go to some family event, one of your own family event, or with friends who know nothing about your research. And someone says to you, so what is it that you do? You must have this. What exactly is it that you do? You know? And we're stuck for answers very often, aren't we? We go, well, you know, that's really complicated because, you know, I've been doing this, and you get sort of like 2 or 3 minutes into an explanation, you see the eyes glaze over, you know, and so it needs something like this. Now, you may be a bit better practiced now at that, I'm sure you are, but for an interview, we really need to be good at this. Being able to say, well, the issue is blah, 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 blah. You know, in a nutshell, I've got it just in a few seconds, 12 or 15 seconds, I can tell you what it's about. Because it's always easier to elaborate than it is to condense under pressure. The second thing is this: of all the things that you want to say in this interview, and you may have a long list of 10 or 20 things that you want to get over to your audience, you won't get a chance. So there's another danger, and that is this, that not only is it short, but you may be asked questions that you can go on about. I sometimes have clients who will say to me, well, I'm already, you know, so I've already given an interview. I did an interview this morning. It went really well. I really enjoyed doing it. They didn't ask me anything I couldn't answer. And I'll say, so were you able to get some of your key issues across? And they'll go, oh no, there wasn't time for that. You know? And I would say that was a real waste of an opportunity. It's easy to be seduced into talking about stuff that you can talk about, you enjoy talking about, you feel safe talking about, but not talk about the things that are really important. They may coincide happily, but they may not. So what you need to do is to be very, very clear in your own mind what the most important things are that you want to say once you're given the chance in an interview. And they should then act like magnets, that your brain is always going back to talk about those things. Now, just 2 stages remain. Never talk about anything, especially on radio and television, without trying to illustrate it. Find a good example, find a nice metaphor or an analogy or a good word picture that will bring this thing that you're talking about to life. Work hard at it, talk to other people about it. If you find something that doesn't quite work, keep going until you do find something that works. And always think in terms of illustrations. The currency of the media is word pictures, it's images, it's a series of vignettes. It's all about a series of impressions that go into people's minds. We tend not to listen to radio or watch television in a linear fashion. We pick things out that strike us. So if you know that, then you should be thinking, okay, I want to talk about this and this and this. How will I bring that to life? That's the question. And the last bit is we need to encapsulate what we have to say. This is a bit of a wriggle, you'll see why. What I mean by it really is if you can find a quote, if you can find a nice punchy pithy quote that will drive your main point home, all the better. Because it means your story will live for longer. You're familiar with newspapers that take a quote from a story and blow it up, and the idea is the eye is drawn to that. And you think, oh, that's interesting. I'll look at that. Or the news headlines come up, and you hear a quick clip of somebody saying something, and you go, oh, I wonder, and I'll hang on to see the whole of the story. That's how it works. And stories that were very, very busy and full at the beginning of the day, by the time you get to 10 o'clock at night, might still be, the embers might still be glowing. If you can find some good quotations, they'll be remaining when everything else has gone. So that's so I can do this spin, a nice little mnemonic there. And I want to finish with this. So as you're thinking about you want to talk about your research, you now have a process to go through. You can't do too much. You can't say too much in the media, but you've got a process that you could go through. But when you're actually in the heat of it, how does it work? So this is my illustration, tennis. And it's like this, the ball comes over the net, so you intercept it with your racket, by which I mean answer the damn question. Don't avoid the question. That's a lot of people think that's what I'm going to say. Don't avoid the question. Answer it. And the answer might be, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Or, no, that's not right at all. Or, I think it's about 50% for men and about 40% for women. Okay. All those are answers. And then, the next bit, when you've answered the question, and the important thing, remember, don't go on about stuff that doesn't help you. You knock the ball back when you want it to go. That's what we do in tennis. So it might be the question comes to you and you go, actually, that's not really my area of expertise. You need to talk to one of my colleagues about that who specialise in. My guess is it would be about 25%, but I'm not an expert in that, so don't hold me to that. What I can tell you, you knock the ball back where you want it to go. And you're back to one of your priority points, okay, which you've thought about, how you're going to talk about this. The question comes back. The ball comes over the net, you intercept it with your racket. No, I absolutely disagree. I think that's really the wrong path to go. What we should be doing, you knock the ball back where you want it to go. One of your priority points. One of the things that you thought that you would talk about. Get the idea? That's the rhythm of it. And it's proactive. 2 last quick things, and I know my time has gone. We need to have questions. 2 quick things to say. When I learned to drive, or my dad actually tried to teach me to drive to start with, which was a bad idea. And I was scared of the car, and I was kind of weaving all over the place, driving very slowly, but weaving all over the road. So we got a driving instructor. The driving instructor came, and I did exactly the same to him. But he, being professional, just said to me, look, he knew this problem. He said, what you're doing, because you're scared of the car, you're looking at the end of the bonnet of the car. So you're all over the road. What you need to do is look up the road where you're going, right? And the car straightened up magically, and it's still there. It did today. On my way down here, didn't run anyone over or anything. Good. It's the same with this. If you are upset, and I'm not saying the questions aren't important and we shouldn't engage and have proper conversations with interviewers and so on. That's good. That's a really good thing to do, to be engaged with the people who are asking us questions. But if you are focused on what they are asking you, you'll be all over the road. If you stay focused on what you think is important that you want to say, it will work better. When I do my radio shows, I have done for years and years and years when I've been asking questions as a producer and so on of people. Every now and again, I really want to know something. I really want to get to the bottom of something. How does that work? What have you done with the money? Or whatever, you know. But generally, when I'm asking questions in an interview, you could actually have a subtitle that would do for any question that I ask or my colleagues ask. And the subtitle, whatever we say, would read like this: please say something interesting. Are you with me? So what happens with most people is they go, God, you know, I don't know that. You've asked me, you know, I just can't think how I can put that into words. And you can see people panicking because they can't ask the question, as if it was an exam question. That's not what's going on at all. Just take it as read that most questions you are being asked is just the interviewer's way of saying, please, please say something interesting. Because why? Because they're in the business of luring cats. If you're interesting, the audience is interested, the cats come. Got the idea? That's it in a nutshell. Okay, that's the fastest presentation I've done in a long time on being interviewed, but there you go. So there is some time for some questions. I'm sorry I've crashed over a bit, but I hope it's all makes sense. The most, sorry, I'm still stealing time for questions, but it just occurred to me that the biggest thing I have when I'm training people to be interviewed is they're so damn polite. They go, well, the reason I didn't push my own agenda was because he just didn't ask me any questions about it. Well, no, he probably won't. Because he or she who's asking the questions doesn't give a damn about your agenda. You know? They just don't care about your agenda. You are the only person who cares about your agenda in that interview. That's the thing to get across. So you do have to be a tad pushy. And that might go against the grain, but that's the skill. It's possible to be pushy and pleasant at the same time. Right, I really am stopped.